Rolling with RAQ, Season 2, Episode 2. Back at it with a recap and discussion of Season 2, Episode 2 of Power Book 3, Raising Kanan, Mind Your Business. So the show pretty much picks up where last week's episode left off, the premiere, which was with RAQ meeting up with Howard to talk. As expected, Howard obviously hasn't forgotten through some form of amnesia that Kanan was the one that shot him. It's just a matter of, for whatever reason, at this point in time, he's decided not to speak to the police. What he explained to Burke about laying in the hospital, being close to death, and now kind of rethinking some of the decisions and things he's done in his life, that part was seemingly true. So he meets with RAQ, and it looks like he's not going to take any immediate action against Kanan. He's not looking for revenge or anything like that, or at least not at this point. I think he did an honest assessment of himself and realized that he created the situation because, as I said in the previous episode, and as well in the season finale, he put RAQ in a difficult position by threatening to, first off, tell everyone that he was Kanan's father, thereby putting her and Kanan's lives in danger by branding them as snitches and putting her up at stake. And then secondly, by him threatening to have Kanan sent to Spofford. Not because he was trying to do his job as a police officer, but really as a way of kind of blackmailing RAQ. He basically left her with very limited options. Had he not done that, up to that point, he was annoying her, but she hadn't taken any steps to do anything to him or harm him. But him potentially putting her and Kanan in danger, it forced her into the difficult spot, a desperate spot, really, of having to do some unsavory things. It forced her hand, in a way, basically sending Kanan out to try to kill him. Keep in mind that he had specified if he saw her or her brothers or anything like that, he would take action. He wasn't willing to speak to anyone but Kanan. With this conversation, it seems to kind of squash the situation. And this thing is no longer hanging over Kanan's head, or at least not in that form. So this is like another one of those storylines from the first season that have been cleaned up. I really didn't like the storyline of Howard being Kanan's father because it seemed like, some soap opera business. And I also didn't like the storyline of him having leukemia and all of this other stuff, Kanan potentially being the one to save his life. So I do like that they basically got rid of the leukemia storyline. So they're no longer bogged down by this. As we learn here that Howard mentions to RAQ that, her chain smoking is a bad idea. It's going to kill her. And so she kind of brushes it off, but also mentions that in addition to getting police officers out of her life, she also seemingly can't quit smoking. And that actually he gave her her first cigarette. You can see the influence that he's had on her. And it's like just these little details that help to flesh out their backstory. So here you have this older guy. RAQ was a teenager. He would have been like in his mid-20s. He was sleeping with an underage girl. And he introduced her to smoking. Now, as an adult, you rarely see RAQ without a cigarette in her hand. Like, she chain smokes like nobody's business. And here it is that you find out that this is like a bad habit she has, and she pretty much picked it up from him. He introduced it to her. So you could just imagine like the negative influence he's had on her. But it seems like he's trying to kind of mend the fences. They've both taken hits at each other, and effectively it seems like they, at least for the moment, have called a bit of a truce. Right now, she doesn't really have anything to fear from him from the perspective of him trying to do Kanan harm. But she's still not really open to him being Kanan's dad, right? She tries to play it off as basically that she was seeing a lot of guys when she was a teen and doesn't really know who Kanan's father was, which doesn't really sound like that was the case. But anyway, when Kanan ended up bleeding from that little fight with Scrappy, Howard took his DNA to be tested and has confirmed, so it's now definite, that he is Kanan's father. We know that DEF CON was not Kanan's father because him and RAQ never slept together. They never had a sexual relationship. And thus far, we haven't heard mention of RAQ dealing with anyone else at the time. So RAQ knew it, but it gives Howard some definite confirmation that this is his child. Now, moving on to Scrappy, we saw Scrappy at the police station, and it made things a little bit unclear because he disobeyed her, right? She gave him very specific warnings to ease up on the gambling because she didn't want any police contact, attention, or anything like that. You can see in every phase of the business, in all areas of the business, RAQ is trying to keep things very quiet, eliminating any opportunities or reasons for the police to really pay them attention. Things, for the most part, are running smoothly, and a large part of this is them staying off the police radar. Scrappy doesn't listen, and he gets swept up in this raid on his mom's gambling den. So she gave him the warning. He's making so much money. they're all making all of this money. You don't want to create opportunities for the police to arrest you on these small petty things. These minor offenses that you can get picked up on can end up rolling up into larger crimes. You telling and stuff like that, potentially becoming a liability. So in telling everyone to stay quiet and not bring any unwanted attention, it's a good idea. Scrappy made the wrong move. And the problem is when Howard saw Scrappy, and we as well as the audience saw him at the police station, the other officer that said that, his CI was complaining or whatever, when he looks over, you see Scrappy, but also Scrappy's mom. So it's completely possible that Scrappy was the informant, but it's also possible that it might have been his mom. The problem with Scrappy is that he's pretty high up in the Thomas organization. And by him, it's like he just created this world of problems by being there, just going to the gambling den. It's like, it's completely possible his mom is the informant, but he created some serious problems here. RAQ doesn't want to immediately go on Howard's word, so she takes it to her brothers. Lou wants no parts of it, and basically settles on having Marvin try to ferret out what the deal is with Scrappy. Another issue complicating matters is that RAQ has this plan to expand to the 40s. Basically, she's going to bring Worrell, or she plans to bring Worrell into the fold. In the previous conversation, he was understandably fussing about bringing Worrell into the organization, given their past history. When Marvin goes to talk to him, it's a little bit difficult to read. It's like you can go either way. Like, he's lost an eye. His loyalty has been battle tested. But it sounds like the perfect grounds or perfect circumstances for someone to decide that they're going to start talking. Marvin questions him about the previous night, he tried to get in touch with him. It sounds like this might have been during the time when Scrap was at the card game. And so he kind of asked him where he was and things like that during that time, as in, I tried to reach out to you, and Scrappy gives him a cover story instead of coming clean. Marvin gives him the benefit of the doubt, or tries to, and goes to check it out. He says that I think he was hanging pictures for his cousin or something like that. And it's like this story just isn't adding up. Now, it's possible that he was just lying to cover being at the gambling spot and he wasn't snitching or anything like that. But how are they supposed to know? Basically, these are not things that you want to have to worry about. Who's telling, who's doing this, all that kind of stuff. It takes your focus off of the business. You want to focus on this business that you're running, and Scrappy just kind of messed it up. It's difficult to call whether or not he's talking, but it's even a problem that they're in the position of having to question your loyalty, because he was indeed at the police station. This uncertainty brings just further problems between RAQ and Lou, because Lou just does not question Scrap's loyalty. And it seems that Marvin is undecided. Pretty much it comes down to it something's going to have to be done about him. And neither one of them wants to do the job. So RAQ, as she often does the thing that no one else is comfortable doing. She steps up, and this is basically the second time that we see her take someone out. I think we saw from the first season, the apprehension that she showed, or basically her sending other people to take out, to deal with these problems, is that it's not that she's afraid to kill anyone. I think it's just a matter of, if there's another way to get around it, she'd rather not be the one to do it, right? And often with her being the leader, it's probably more convenient and efficient to have someone else carry out these hits if they need to be done. But if the situation calls for it, it seems she doesn't have a problem stepping up. Basically, it's certainly her brothers are her protectors and things like that, but I think she's capable of getting out there and putting in that work if need be. So she still has problems. Kanan, meanwhile, he has his own things going on, and Jukebox, as we know, is now living with RAQ. Kanan and Jukebox, meanwhile, are at home watching the movie Cooley High. And so as we come to find out, this is a movie that they've watched several times. Jukebox initially pokes fun at Kanan for crying when Cochise dies. So Cochise is one of the characters in the movie. And Kanan initially responds to Jukebox poking fun at him, sniffling and whatnot. He attempts to hide it, but she turns around and basically tells him no, seriously, it's not something to be ashamed of. Him caring about the character, him having some humanity and compassion for this character did something. It's something that he shouldn't lose. And knowing what these two become, it's significant might not be the word, but it put me on notice. It's like they're really making a point of driving home just how human these two are. Just not in the sense that Kanan feels compassion for this character to the point where he cries about his death. And then also that Jukebox encourages this for him to not lose his humanity, for him to hold on to that it's not something to be ashamed of. Actually, if you think back to the last season, his machismo in like the last episodes where it's like, she told him to pretty much cut it out, like this tough guy act that he's putting on, she knows that that's not him, and looking at him as a kid, it goes back to when RAQ was speaking to Howard. Howard points out to RAQ that Kanan is a terrible shot. During the exchange that they have, from the little bit that Howard has seen of him, much like several of these other characters, multiple people now telling RAQ that Kanan is not cut out for that life. Kanan might be her son, but within him there's a good person. He doesn't need to be in this life. I think at some point you accept and understand that maybe it's not for him, right? But you can see up until last season, it sounds like Kanan was a regular child living a regular life. It's not until he decided to involve himself in his mother's business, because she didn't push him into it. He was pretty much a regular kid up to that point. And you can see from the fact that he's compassionate, if you look at him not just crying with this movie, but his sympathy towards Davina, the various little moments that you see from the first season, like him with Scrappy and stuff like that after Scrappy's like banged up. He's not some cold-hearted killer. RAQ was not raising him to be in her business. RAQ isn't really a terrible person outside of the drug business. And she wasn't raising Kanan to be some like cold-hearted killer or something, right? She wasn't raising him to come into her business, to be a part of her business. If anything, she was raising him to be a decent person and to live a life far outside of this life that she's living. I think that speaks to who RAQ is as a person outside of this. It drives home the point that I don't think that most people are completely evil. Right? That's why when you have characters that are flat like that, where it's like the villains are just bad all the time, they're out here killing, maiming, they have no kind of humanity, it makes them feel flat and unrealistic, because most people are not like that. It really proves the point that this business, this thing that they're involved with, is what robs them of their humanity. These things they feel they have to do to remain on top, it's what changes them. Because it's like, if you go back to the first season, let's say, look at RAQ aside from the business. If you look at her, she's not a very rowdy, rah-rah kind of person. She doesn't go out of her way to give anyone a hard time. It's like, if you look at her when she's at home, and even you see it here, her at home with Jukebox, they actually have like a pretty nice moment. It doesn't happen very often, but on the occasions where we see Jukebox and RAQ together, just the two of them, they have these very intimate conversations. It's like Jukebox is kind of like RAQ's daughter, if you think of it. She loves Kanan, yes, but she's open and vulnerable, incredibly loving towards Jukebox in a way that, not to say she doesn't love Kanan, but she shows it differently with Jukebox, right? In a way that you don't really see with Kanan. Part of it is, I think, because he's a boy, he's her son, and part of it might be on his part. Like you see her hug him and tell him that she loves him and whatnot, but the way that she expresses that, or the way that she interacts with Jukebox versus Kanan, it's different, right? There's an extra warmth and whatnot in her interactions with Jukebox. When they talk, they're both very open with each other. She tells Jukebox things about herself that she doesn't even tell Kanan. And it's like last season, without going into details on either of their parts, they had this conversation about relationships and being in love. Not to say it's never happened, but it's not something that we see on camera with her and Kanan. Here it is that you have her talking to Jukebox about like the difficulties of being a mother. It doesn't sound like at any point in time she's regretted having Kanan, but she expresses here that being a mother is hard. You have some misgivings, and sometimes you feel like she expresses that she doesn't really pass any judgment on Jukebox's mother for leaving. She expresses that whatever difficulties her mom was having, they never had a conversation about it, but she understands it. Because being a mother herself, she understands how difficult it is. This is something that you haven't really heard her have a conversation with anyone else about, right? Imagine when she had Kanan. She was, 16 years old? She's now 31. She's raised a 15-year-old essentially by herself in this life of crime, risking her life to provide for him. And it's like you hear her basically say she doesn't downplay the role of fathers, but it's like Kanan's never had a father in his life, be that Howard, Defcon, or anyone like that. It sounds like Defcon was in jail and he's probably dead by now, it sounds like. she's been responsible for Kanan his entire life. She's taken these tremendous risks to provide for him. And as she expresses here, she doesn't downplay the role of fathers, but she speaks from the perspective of a mother to the difficulty, the pressure, the responsibility of being solely responsible for your child. It's like, unlike Jukebox's mom, she stepped up and accepted that responsibility rather than walking away. She expresses Jukebox's mom realizing that maybe she wasn't cut out for motherhood. Maybe in some way she made the right choice by stepping away, realizing that she was not cut out to raise Jukebox. And it's like, if you look at RAQ, there's this thing of people asking her, starting back from the first season, where she went back and forth, and kind of considering it herself, sending Kanan first to his grandmother, and then later on in the season, she sends him to her cousin or whoever this lady is down in Virginia. Ultimately deciding that because she's his mother, he's her son, he should stay with her. You know, that she has the responsibility to raise him, to take care of him, and to keep him safe and secure. And towards the end of the last episode, she apologized to him, expressed remorse for putting him in harm's way with regards to Howard. You know, she expressed last season when she was teaching him how to cook that she knows that she's made some mistakes with him. It sounds like she's done the best that she can, but she's still made some mistakes raising him. Regardless of the responsibility or the difficulty and whatnot, she's accepted full responsibility for him. That's her child, and she's made the decision that she's going to take care of him. You know, she's not going to hand that responsibility off to anyone else. But here you have to ask the question, is that really the right choice? As she expresses here, and it's probably something she's considered as well, in that Jukebox's mom stepped aside because she felt she wasn't fit to raise Jukebox. It's like, does RAQ have those questions about herself, given that she's involved in this life of drug dealing? You can see that she's gone back and forth about this. And ultimately, instead of stepping aside, she's decided that she's going to continue shouldering that responsibility. Now, whether or not that's the right decision, can't really call it, right? Because if she just abandoned him, if she just dropped him, but then again, maybe there's like a middle ground, right? If she just abandoned him, that'd be wrong as well. So you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. You have this contrasting between RAQ and Jukebox's mother. I believe her name is Kenya. And RAQ messes up in some ways in raising Kanan. I think that she's well-intentioned, but she makes mistakes, and one of them is being involved in this life. But it sounds like as a 16-year-old trying to provide without her parents, right, taking care of what sounds like the situation, she was pretty much by herself. And now having this child, it's like, how many options do you really have for providing for Kanan at that age? And it's like, sure, she has her brother, but Lulu would have been even younger at that point in time. It sounds like Marvin was in the streets and eventually would end up going to jail. And it's like, without that support system that you need, what options would you have at that age to legitimately take care of yourself and a child? Right? You see back then, and even now, that she doesn't shirk the responsibility. She didn't hand off the responsibility of taking care of Kanan. She accepted that responsibility, and regardless of whatever sacrifices on her part, like harm to herself or whatever else, she's going to try the best that she can to raise him, to take care of him. She's making some mistakes and she's making some terrible decisions. But it seems like she kind of feels like she's stuck. And given the circumstances, she's kind of doing the best that she can with her limited options. So I felt like the contrast between the two of them, not to say that one is one is a mother and the other chose not to be. It says a lot about her character, that regardless of whatever flaws and shortcomings, she stood firm in raising Kanan, but then also took on the added responsibility at a very young age of helping to raise her niece as well. So we see RAQ is still using the back room at the store, at the bodega, as her stash house, right? But they have rats there. Juliana's been setting traps as best as she can, but there's a lot of rats there. And this is like an issue that you have with places where food is being stored. You know, Juliana apologizes to RAQ, but stores a lot of cash back there, and that's like nesting material. So they're making all of this money at Baisley, and she just has boxes and boxes of cash at the back of the store. Juliana actually points out to her, asks her, like, you have all of this cash and you don't really spend it, and it's getting eaten up by rats. Could be some foreshadowing. RAQ tells her to call us an exterminator, but part of the bigger problem is that you need to figure out something to do with this money instead of just having it sit here. You know, she has all of this cash, but seemingly no real way of like cleaning it. Like, you need to launder it. So it's like you have this dirty cash. You start spending it, you bring unwanted attention to yourself. Juliana explains that with the money that she's made, she's sent it back home and used it to buy a house. And so here we see, I think in the next scene, if not a few scenes later, we see RAQ in a real estate agent's office discussing houses. And, the agent recommends, I want to say Hollis, which is like a regular neighborhood in Queens. If you're unfamiliar with the neighborhoods in Queens, you have like Hollis, which you might know from Run DMC. You have St. Albans, which is where LL Cool J is from. Queens Village, where like my grandfather and I have quite a bit of family that live there still. And so they're all like, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're like regular neighborhoods, like regular working class neighborhoods. But RAQ mentions Forest Hills, which is actually like a really nice neighborhood. It's kind of pricey now. I don't know what it was like then, but I'm assuming it was probably nice back then. You have like $1 million homes and things like that. She's interested in really nice neighborhoods in Queens, but also some in Long Island. But the woman is like just recommending places that are predominantly Black. So the neighborhood where she currently lives, which is the south side of Jamaica, that's a predominantly Black neighborhood. At the time, this was like a very rough area, right? But with some of these more regular neighborhoods, you kind of have limitations with what you can get for your money, right? Just because of how the areas are planned out. So it's like if you want a nice big yard, if you want a bigger home, some of these kinds of things, you're going to have to consider other neighborhoods just because of the footprint of how the homes are built. But the lady is kind of attempting to limit her options. And I mean, we know that RAQ is a drug dealer. We don't really know what the previous conversation was before the scene picked up. But it's like this lady has made some assumptions about RAQ as far as what she can afford. So the lady is offering her options limited by both budget and the people that live in the neighborhood, the demographics of the neighborhood. But RAQ wants to fully explore all of the options out there. Like, she's got bank. And so the lady starts talking to her about mortgages, that, the homes in these neighborhoods are pricey, they're more expensive. If you need a mortgage, you're going to have to show proof of income, last 2 years of tax returns and all this kind of stuff. Like pretty much telling her, if you need a mortgage, you're going to, your credit is going to have to be good. And she's like, well, I'm planning on paying cash. And she's like, well, you'll need proof of income, you'll need tax returns. It's like RAQ is telling her, I want to buy up here. And she's coming up with all of these things as to why RAQ should just consider down here. And so basically, like, RAQ kind of ends the conversation and pretty much tells her, like, listen, like, I need you to show me the things I'm looking at. Like, you don't tell me what I can or can't afford. Show me what you have and let me make the decision from there. It's like she's kind of placing limitations on her, making assumptions about her. And it's like, RAQ brushes her off, tells her, number one, she won't need a mortgage. And secondly, she'll be paying cash. She has the documents to provide proof of income and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, you don't worry about that. I just need you to find places for me to look at. Don't worry about my finances. So it's like, it's not really a tense exchange because RAQ remains pretty calm. But it's like you have the lady on the one side of the table looking at RAQ and making assumptions about her. And then RAQ on the other side of the table basically just shutting all of that down. In and of itself, I found it pretty interesting because I felt from the first season that, RAQ owns this house. The brothers have homes as well. It seems like they don't live very far from each other and they don't live very far from where they hustle. So it's like you look at it last season, Unique knew where RAQ was living. Right? He knew where Lulu was living. He was able to send his people by to shoot up RAQ's house and then later on to shoot up and firebomb Lou's house. I've always felt that they live too out in the open. It's like granted, they're not like selling drugs right out in front of their houses, but it's like if you live close enough where your competitors know where you live, where your kids live, where they go to school and stuff like that, and can just walk or drive by your house, that seems like a security risk. So maybe it was a matter of they kind of bought what they could afford at the time, what they knew at the time. But it's like, RAQ is now doing substantially better financially. She wasn't hurting for cash before, but she's like flooded with cash now. So she's exploring options to kind of move out of the neighborhood, to potentially buy a new house. And as far as if this place is just an investment or a house she actually plans to live into, like a matter of her looking to move to a new neighborhood, can't really tell us yet, right? She mentioned at the start of the season, like, wanting to franchise to the 40s, so to expand the business model that they had basically to the 40 projects. And with that, she wanted Lou to run to run it, right? Because she mentioned in the conversation, kind of got cut off because he turned down the work, that with Kanan being back, it sounds like she kind of wants to take a step back a little bit from the business. And maybe this might be a step in that direction. I did speak to Symphony last season about eventually wanting to change her life, to step away from this kind of stuff a little bit. And this might be her taking the first, steps towards that. Like, how nice would it be if she moves and maybe her and Symphony get back together and she's now living in a nice house and stuff, little baby and whatnot. And she leaves this life behind, because honestly, I think it's entertaining to watch, but in real life, I feel this is no kind of way to live. It's like you are pretty much living on borrowed time with this lifestyle. And I think that's something she recognizes. I appreciate actually that the show doesn't really sugarcoat it. That RAQ seems to be very well aware that the longer she stays in this business, the greater the chances of something happening to her, be that physical harm to her or her going to jail. My hope is, and I hope that it plays out, that this house isn't just like an investment as far as some place to just park the money, but rather it's her looking to buy this house and maybe start working on that vision that she shared with Symphony, of her pretty much moving on and becoming like the RAQ that she really wants to be, rather than this person. Following RAQ's conversation with Howard, she's trying to keep Kanan closer, right? Like, she's trying to keep closer tabs on him. She's at home, sitting in a corner for whatever reason, listening to, some kind of off-brand music or whatever. Last season, if you recall, like, Kanan would be out and about doing his own thing, and she'd seemingly have no idea what he was doing. So she's trying to get away from that, trying to keep him away from Howard, but also trying to keep closer tabs on him. But I think she fumbles in the way that she has this conversation with him. Like, Howard isn't willing to wait any longer for RAQ to introduce him to Kanan and explain the situation, right? Like, he's going to just take those steps on his own. And so, she had told Kanan that Howard didn't remember anything from that night. He confirms to her that obviously he did. The story that she got is probably just what he was feeding to the cops and the medical staff. But in trying to kind of head him off, she makes a clumsy attempt to kind of give Kanan a heads up, that Howard might approach him. And, he's talking like some craziness or whatever, which is pretty much him being Kanan's dad. And she tries to tell him, like, should he approach you? Like, don't pay what he's saying any mind or whatever. She doesn't explain to him what the situation is. And it comes across as being kind of weird, right? Which he picks up on. I actually feel she should probably just gone ahead and told him the truth. Or not the truth, but some version of it. Like, listen, like, this guy's out here being crazy, talking about him being your father and all this kind of stuff. I was never with him and blah, blah, blah. I feel like that would have been the better way to go. But just like, hey, if he tries to talk to you, he's like out here talking some craziness, just don't listen to him. It's like, well, what is he going to try to tell me? The stuff with Kanan just really throws her off, right? It's like the way that she approaches him is just so weird. It makes her suspicious in the situation. She's trying to reassure him that everything's okay, and it does quite the opposite of that. It's like, here it was that just a week ago you were or however long ago, you were telling him everything's okay. And now here you are being all weird and stuff like that. Of course he's going to be worried. It's like, you're making matters kind of worse, right? She fumbles here. The way that she goes about trying to explain the situation to him or trying to smooth the situation has just led to him having more questions. And so it's like just this really awkward exchange. The camera shoots from behind RAQ. Right? And you see Kanan's face. And he's like just side-eyeing her, But then it's like the camera switches and it's showing her face and Kanan from behind. And it's like there's this look of uncertainty on her face, like, okay, I hope that he bought this. But meanwhile, we know that he's looking at her crazy. He's not buying this story. If anything, he's wondering, like, what on earth is going on here? And it goes back to this previous episode about him slipping away. The body language is off, right? Like the hug that they have, like she hugs him, but it's like awkward. The camera shoots RAQ from behind and you see Kanan's face and he's like side-eyeing her. Like, what kind of weirdness is this? And the camera then switches to the reverse where it's showing Kanan from behind and her face. And you see that she has this look of uncertainty in her face. Like, I hope you bought that. It's like, But we know that he's looking at her like she's crazy. He's not buying this story. If anything, he has more questions than he did before. And it goes back to this thing from the previous episode of her feeling like he's slipping away. Like she mentioned that she used to be able to read him, to know what he's thinking, which allowed her to better anticipate his moves. And like she could think a few steps ahead of him, but it's like he's throwing her off, right? Her tactics for manipulating him aren't really working anymore. On the flip side of that, we then see Unique, who just 3 months after this dust up between him and RAQ, basically everything he has is fallen apart. He's lost his corners. His crew is out there, but, they're kind of not doing well. RAQ has made the pitch to Worrell for him to come and work with her. I was with everyone else that her bringing Worrell into the fold would kind of be setting them up for the potential that he might be trying to set them up. That it would be a way of sort of like him being a Trojan horse, where he would go along with the idea, but really with the plan and intent of remaining loyal to Unique. But we see that Unique is now out of prison and he's trying to regroup and get himself back together. And 3 of the people that he visits would be Dean, his child's mother, Vanessa, I think is her name, and actually RAQ and Vanessa end up crossing paths. And so as RAQ is leaving the back of the bodega, I didn't recognize her at first, but I saw her looking at this woman on the way out the store, and the two of them are looking at each other, and it turns out that it was Unique's child mother. Her hair's a little bit different and whatnot, but when RAQ came out of the back of the store, I was wondering why she was looking at this lady like that. I thought maybe it might have been because the lady was looking at her. They didn't exchange any words or anything like that, but that's when it clicked for me that this was Unique's child mother. And so RAQ was looking at her because she knows her, and apparently she knows RAQ as well. She ends up telling Unique that they crossed paths in the bodega. That RAQ was staring at her. It sounds like she felt a little bit intimidated. RAQ didn't do anything to her. She wasn't aggressive or anything like that, but she made eye contact and didn't look away. RAQ ultimately left the store, but I think it goes to show that with her being at the bodega in just those 3 months, it looks like they're probably from the neighborhood originally, but it's just that they had that place out in Harlem. In those 3 months, it seems like she's back in the neighborhood, back living at her mom's house. And actually, we see at her mom's house that Unique is there spending time with his son, playing with the kid in the living room, while Vanessa and her mom are in another room talking. And the mom is just dogging Unique. I would understand if she just didn't approve of his lifestyle as far as him selling drugs and whatnot. That'd be a perfectly valid thing to say. But in this case, Unique ends up speaking up and saying that she's a hypocrite because she didn't have a problem with him selling drugs, right? She didn't have a problem when he was paying her bills, buying her cars, lavishing money on her. He was a great person then, and she didn't have all that stuff to say about him. It's interesting that in the space of just 3 months that they're back to the neighborhood. Did they get kicked out because of the police showing up and, the drama and whatnot? Or is it that he's out of money? It seems like a huge reversal of fortune in a short space of time. Compare Unique and RAQ, where it was looking at last season, Unique was telling Lou that RAQ was about to fall. Everything she had was about to fall apart. And in 3 months' time, he is where he assumed RAQ would be. She's pretty much taken over everything and muscled him out. And it's telling because when he goes to meet with Dean, right, he wants to get back out there in the corners. And so he's going to need supply. He's going to need drugs to sell. But just the fact that the police were looking at him and they haven't quite moved on as yet, they've just released him. Dean doesn't want to have anything to do with him. It's he's a little bit too hot at that moment. Dean's henchman who was standing guard at the door, in this case, he gives Unique a really hard time. He's giving him some serious negative energy. He yokes him up against the wall, and the reception he gets is just different. It's even different from what RAQ got. Dean just doesn't want to have anything to do with him. He even goes back and checks in the tailor shop. It's it looks like someone came in and just threw all the stuff about the place, just broke stuff up and whatnot. He goes to the back, he sits down and sets up a chair and stuff, and you can see him sitting back there taking stock of the situation. And Worrell walks in, And he starts, like kind of sharing this idea of wanting to get things back in order and pretty much telling Worrell, like, I need you. He's expecting Worrell to come back and be his right-hand man. And it's at that point that Worrell tells him that he might want to pack it in because he's switched sides. He's accepted RAQ's opportunity. Like, he's going to get down with them. He's going to go and be down with that team, which caught me off guard because I really was expecting him to like be kind of working undercover for Unique. But it seems like RAQ might have made the right call in bringing in Worrell. As in, sure, he's turning his back on Unique. He's coming over to her side, but it sounds like he's fully turned his back on Unique. He's lost his place to stay. He's lost his connect. He's lost his soldier. It's like he mentions feeling like he's on the outside looking in. And realistically, that's the situation. RAQ has put Unique in a very difficult position. She's like petting him in from all sides, like what he was trying to do to her in the first season. They've put him in a really tough position of having to build his way back from nothing. I'm very curious to see how he climbs back from here. It's interesting because he's now in a position of absolute desperation. He's in the position where RAQ was last season, and actually even worse off. So I'm curious to see how he maneuvers or how things work out for him by the end of the season, because seemingly everyone has turned their back on him. Vanessa still seems to like him and stuff. I wouldn't count him out because at this point, it's like he's at the bottom. He can't go any lower. And with that desperation and some determination, you never know what he might be able to do, how he might be able to turn this around. And so the other person with a major story going on in this episode would be Lou. Things are still kind of sketchy between him and Jessica, and also with Crown. He has some static with RAQ because he's really just not trying to be involved with most of the stuff in the business. It's like she tells him to do whatever, and it's like 9 times out of 10, he's not with it. So we see he's really making a push for this new artist that he's found. He's excited about her, but it's adding on to this brewing tension between him and Crown. There's this tension between Lou and Crown because of this new artist. He's recorded this song with her. We heard it last episode. Crown is listening to it. He's not really impressed. I'm not really impressed with the song either. But Lou is like super excited about the girl. He's super excited about the song. Lou starts talking about signing her. Crown isn't with it. He's just not feeling it at the same level as Lou. You have this thing with the Thomas kids where it's like they're just browbeaters, where it's like it's their way and everyone else is supposed to just fall in line. And I understand with Crown taking money from Lou, him taking a percentage of the company, because pretty much he ended up bankrolling everything. But at the same time, it's like Crown has a bit of experience in the music business. It was his company. It's like if they're supposed to be partners in the business, they need a better way of working things out between themselves when they have a difference of opinion. Things shouldn't just be, I'm the one that put up the money, so I get the ultimate say. But this seems to be an attitude that you see in him and at least RAQ as well. I feel like Crown actually has some valid points that he's making. To kind of add insult to injury, there's this new character that comes in. I can't remember his name, but basically he's described as being involved in different businesses. He's like a big timer in the drug business, but he also has like some legitimate companies, one of which is an entertainment company, and he has this girl under contract. So he comes walking in as he's heard from this young lady that, Lou approached her about signing her, but she's like already signed to him. So basically, if Lou wants to deal with her, he's going to have to deal with this guy. He offers a single deal, where they'll sign her, they'll put out a single and whatnot. He'll make her available for a single. Crown doesn't like this idea. He doesn't want to sign her in general, right? But this single deal, he looks at it as if they put out the single and it becomes a smash, sure, you might make some money off of that. But then it puts you in the position as the label of you working to make her hot, working to put out that single and making that effort and whatnot. And then them using that as leverage to sign with a different label, with a larger label. So it's like you're taking the risk of putting in the initial legwork to get her started, only for her to get signed away to some other label that hasn't put in that time, that hasn't put in the investment. And you'll find yourself out in the cold. So I think Crown made a good point in that regard. But Lou is so fixated on signing her at any cost that he pretty much agrees to any deal, right? I appreciate his ambition, but I feel like he might be rushing into things a little bit too much. It seems like a bad idea from this perspective of his work relationship with Crown, as in here you have it, him just back to back making decisions without really having a conversation with Crown about it. The first time they were just discussing signing her in general, but now you have this added complexity. And it's like he makes this decision without the two of them sitting down to discuss it amongst themselves. Like he just goes ahead and agrees with the guy's single deal. He throws in as part of the offer a potential option to sign a record deal as well. I understand Crown being annoyed. How are you going to have a business partnership and you make decisions like this without really discussing it with your partner? Then it's not a partnership. It's like basically what RAQ does to him, he's here now trying to do to Crown. And I think Crown, he doesn't know it as yet, but Crown helping Jessica to get the job out in LA, I think is just going to make things even worse. At this point when they have this conversation about signing this new artist, he's not aware as yet. But this added stuff on both of their parts is really just going to make their relationship deteriorate further. And I'm curious to see where things go from here, because I remember seeing from the season preview, like there's a clip where RAQ is wearing, I think it's like a red shirt and like some weird looking pants. And she's talking to the guy that comes to speak to Lou about this artist. So at some point in the season, she'll have some kind of contact with him. I'm curious to see. I don't think it's going to have anything to do with the music business, but it might be related to him being a big boy in the drug game. As well as you see there's a scene in the trailer where Crown, I think it is, looks like he's pulling a gun on Lou. Like his face is all messed up and whatnot. You see him pulling a gun on Lou. So I'm curious to see where things go from here. Things are kind of up in the air with their relationship. Her and Lou are making out, possibly being intimate, and she kind of pulls away, right? And he's like, what's going on and whatnot. But it's at that moment that she chooses to tell him that, about this job out in LA. It's not like, 2 months from now I'm leaving, or even 2 weeks from now. She's leaving the very next day. And so he's obviously caught off guard because, number one, Crown was the one to help her get the job. And then secondly, it's like she's telling him she's leaving him the day before. She's breaking up with him. And it sounds like she considered not saying anything to him at all, which I think would have been really cold-blooded. And so she decides against it. But telling him just the day before doesn't seem that much better. I don't really like the way that he speaks to her. Granted, she kind of gives him some of it back. But it's like, it's one of the things that I didn't really like in the way that RAQ would speak to Symphony. Like, it just rubs me the wrong way. I'm not used to that. I could see her breaking up with him because they just seem like they're on different paths, different wavelengths. And then here's this guy that he works with, yes, but he has some conflict with. And this is the person that helped you get this job. Thanks for tuning in. This is the second episode for the second season. And I'm planning to drop a recap and review episode each Monday. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my Rolling with RAQ playlist. Go ahead and click that thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and share it on social media.